What is up, boys and girls? Stones Malone here on behalf of the Moviesleuth.com to talk to you today about the long-awaited season premiere for HBO's Game of Thrones. It's been over a year and a half since we've been waiting for its return, and I am here today to break this one down, and I'm going to be doing this every week. Essentially, here's the gist of it. I'm not going to get into like a super detailed piece-by-piece review because that would end up being a 2-hour video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of just start from front. I'm going to go from front to back, and I'm going to kind of skim over all the goings-on of the episode, stopping at various points that I feel noteworthy. So I'm going to talk about what I felt were the highlights, some of the lowlights, and some of the kind of unknown moments or questionable moments, and then maybe even make some predictions. If you've listened to the Game of Stones podcast that I used to do with my buddies back in the day, you might remember that we had a little segment that we talked about where we kind of highlighted what we felt were the episode's winners and losers. And I had it was like a cute little award system that I had going. And so I'll probably be doing that as well. But let's not waste any more time. I'm just going to kind of get right into it. And we're going to start with the intro. So season to season, the intro has always changed slightly, depending on, what territories we were going to be highlighting in that particular season. This is the most noticeable change, however. Everything looks different, from the astrolabes being made of wood rather than gold, to the fact that the camera kind of pans through each of the, it pans through the bowels of Winterfell and King's Landing. And so I've heard a lot of people refer to it as an upgrade, which you could certainly look at it as such, but I think the fact of the matter is we only have a few territories to look at now. So whereas before we had King's Landing, Winterfell, Dragonstone, the Iron Islands, Dorne, and certain seasons we had a lot of places to visit, so the camera kind of had to just kind of swoop around. Whereas now we've got the Wall, which is obviously been torn apart and broken through by the Night King and his army. And then we've got the Last Hearth, we've got Winterfell, and we've got King's Landing, and that is it. So, we've got plenty of time for the camera to kind of go in and get a deeper and closer look. And as in seasons past, the intro tells a story itself. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I did want to talk about something that people have noticed. On one of the astrolabes, there's an image that we see of, it appears to be a lion holding a fish in its mouth. And then in the center of the image, we have a wolf riddled with arrows and swords hung by a noose. And then we have what many people have interpreted as the Night King holding up a wolf's head. Now, I have heard a little bit of debate surrounding this. I've heard people that seem to interpret this as the Night King holding the wolf's head, but I also have heard people say that this is not the Night King, it's a visual representation of the flayed man. So essentially, it's that image itself, the lion, the wolf, the flayed man, is basically a visual representation of the Red Wedding. So, for what it's worth, I thought I would mention that. But again, I'm not going to get hung up on the intro too much. It does look cool. We'll see if it changes throughout the season. I'm not sure if it will, but we'll see. And so the episode itself begins with a shot of a small boy running around the streets of Wintertown, scrambling over wagons through the citizens that have all gathered to catch a glimpse of the greatest army the world has ever seen. And it doesn't take a sharp eye to recognize that this scene itself is pretty much a direct callback to the pilot episode. Everything from the kids scrambling around, climbing up top of shit, just like Arya and Bran did back then, to the soundtrack. There's a lot of callbacks here, and we're going to get even more callbacks later. But instead of Cersei and Robert, it is Queen Daenerys and Jon. Arya is standing in the crowd. She catches a glimpse of her brother, and I thought that this is one of those moments that really stood out to me. I thought Maisie Williams just did a fantastic job in this scene, expressed a lot of emotion. You could see that she just wanted to call out to Jon, but couldn't bring herself to do it. She thought better of it, kind of looks at the ground, and then she catches a glimpse of the Hound, so her demeanor changes pretty drastically there. And of course, she catches a glimpse of her long-lost friend and potential future romantic interest, Gendry. So as the army marches forward, we see some kind of shady looks being thrown around by the citizens of Winterfell as they catch sight of Missandei and Grey Worm. You have to believe that, and Jon says as much. He reminds Daenerys that the Northerners don't trust outsiders, but this was most likely the first sight of a dark skin colored person that they had ever seen. And they didn't have time to really let that sink in, because before you know it, we've got two giant dragons flying overhead, scaring the piss out of all the citizens. And I thought that reaction was just fantastic. Again, you have to remember that, these people haven't even seen a black person, let alone a fucking dragon. And so I thought that the reaction by the citizens was pretty much perfect. They were kind of, some of them were screaming in terror. Some of them were just, kind of jaw agape. Obviously, Arya was completely blown away and excited to see this. Sansa looked mildly intrigued. And from there, we get a touching reunion between Jon and Bran. I have to say, I really liked the way that both actors played this. It was a very emotive scene. And for Bran, this is probably the most humanity we've seen from him in quite a long time, and maybe more than we'll ever see again. Who knows? But that subtle smile shows us that there is that bit of humanity left in him. He's not 100% potato, but whatever warmth was there in that moment quickly flees the room. As soon as Daenerys attempts to introduce herself and exchange pleasantries with Sansa, Sansa's kind of giving her the evil eye, but Lyanna Mormont is just fucking burning holes right through Daenerys. It reminds me of that time when James Thompson tried to front off Alexander Emelianenko with that fucking shit look. And I know that's a reference that's going to be lost on a lot of people, so I'm not going to get into it. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, you don't. Anyway, whatever discomfort, however uncomfortable that whole scene was starting to get, fortunately, it was cut off and interrupted, but in an even more uncomfortable fashion from now back to 100% potato Bran, where he warns them that there is no time for this. He goes on to explain to Daenerys that the Night King now has her dragon. The dragon has been turned into a white, and that they are marching south. And Daenerys, of course, looks expectedly troubled by this. But the problem that I have with this is that we don't really get any scene at all where Daenerys or even Jon is asking, like, what the fuck is he talking about? How does he know this? You'd think Daenerys, the first thing out of her mouth would be, I'm sorry, excuse me, who are you? And what the fuck are you talking about? We don't get that scene, though. It's a bit of a problem for me. Maybe it's just time constraints, but I thought it was just a little bit weird for me, because from there, we transition right into Sansa sending the Umber Kid back home to fetch his people. She offers to send wagons and horses, whatever she needs. Then we get into kind of a pissing match between Lyanna and Jon. Lyanna, and this is where I mentioned in my instant reaction video, she was just getting a little bit too... her whole shtick is kind of worn out on me, okay? From the moment she was staring Daenerys down, it was just a little bit too much, and now she's just a little too pissy, okay? Now, I understand from their perspective, from the perspective of the characters, things look a little different than it does to us. They don't know Daenerys. They've never seen the Army of the Dead. They don't know how much of it maybe to believe. They don't trust outsiders. That's how Northerners are. That's how Lyanna's character has been painted from the very beginning. I get that. But at the same time, it's like... Jon has proven time and time again that he's trustworthy, he's noble. I mentioned all this in my instant reaction, and it just seems just disrespectful, and I will say that the moment he stands up to explain it himself, she does sit the fuck down. So whatever. And then we still get another pissing match between Sansa and Daenerys. Look, it was all kind of explained to Sansa the moment that Jon set out on his mission last season, what his goal was. Now, granted, as we'll find out later, Sansa didn't expect him to relinquish his quote-unquote crown, but nevertheless, they need an army. They need help. They need the dragons. They need all the help they can get. And Sansa, I got to say, is just kind of acting like a bitch here. Daenerys, I think, has every right to kind of get snippy back. And when Sansa questions what the dragons eat, I'm kind of on Daenerys' side, to kind of give her what for and, whatever they want. Just prior to that, of course, the entire awkward situation was again made even more awkward by Tyrion stepping up and in an attempt to defend Jon. Make mention that the Lannister army was marching forward. And, look, we talk about the Northerners not trusting outsiders. They definitely don't trust the Lannisters. So just like Bran made an awkward situation even worse earlier, we have Tyrion making an awkward situation even worse here. And things don't continue to get much better for Tyrion as he and Sansa have their proper reunion. They discuss the Purple Wedding, which was the last time they had seen each other. And I do have to say that when he talks about it being a miserable affair, and then she comes back with the fact that it had its moments, that was I talked about it in my instant reaction video, that some of the humor in this episode was very heavy-handed, and it annoyed me. Going back to, the eunuch dick jokes with Varys and stuff at the beginning of the episode, all the way to the scene with Tormund and Ed, which we'll get into later. When it's more subtle like this, the whole it had its moments, I thought that was clever. It was a good bit of humor, kind of dark humor, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, they go on to discuss the fact that Tyrion really does believe that Cersei she has something to live for, and that her army is in fact marching north to Winterfell. Sansa's not buying it, of course, and she just kind of throws it into his face how stupid and foolish he's being, and that, with the line that I once thought you were the cleverest man that I ever met, or something like that. And, Tyrion's kind of just left standing there like a dope. And as the camera pans over to Bran, we see him with quite a foreboding look. So not sure what it means, but it certainly doesn't look like it means anything good for poor old Tyrion. And from there, we head on over to the Godswood, where Jon is standing around doing, his Jon Snow thing, silently, well, I don't want to say sulking, but, doing the whole, silent Jon Snow brooding thing. Arya turns up and we get that reunion. This is one of the ones that we've been waiting for a very long time. Just like with Bran, it was a highly emotional one. It was great to see the two together again. Arya, just as Bran has lost his humanity, of course, Arya hasn't lost that on quite that level, but having gone through all the training with the Faceless Men, she's definitely a different character than she was in earlier seasons. So it was nice to see her have some of those moments where she could kind of go back to just being Arya Stark, and having a moment with her big brother. It was nice to see them exchange. She holds out needle, and he smiles, asks her if she's ever had to use it. Oh, once or twice. And of course, she seems to be properly impressed by Longclaw. But beyond that, things get a little bit tough because Jon assumed that he could rely on Arya. Where were you earlier? I kind of needed you back there when Sansa was kind of pissing on my foot there. And Arya, to Jon's surprise, kind of takes Sansa's side. But her whole deal is she's looking out for her family. And I have to wonder, at the moment that, Jon says that he's her family too, and Arya smiles, gives him a hug, and says, "Don't forget that." You have to kind of wonder, does Arya actually know? Did somewhere behind the scenes, off camera, did Bran bother to explain to Arya Jon's true parentage? How much does she know? Does she realize that Jon isn't quite the Stark that everyone thinks he is? So we'll see moving forward. Jon looks intrigued, and I'm certainly intrigued. From there, we got Qyburn informing Cersei of the fact that the dead are marching south. She seems pleased by it, in true arrogant, ignorant fashion. Cersei still seems to think that this is no big deal. I think in her mind, just as she kind of clarified last year, that the two armies are going to cancel each other out, and that all she has to do is bring in the Golden Company and clean up the pieces, whatever's left. Not really bothering to think of the fact that, if the Night King should win, his army just grows exponentially. But anyway, I'm going to get sidetracked here. So we have our shot of Harry Strickland sailing in on Euron's ships with the Golden Company. And I got to say, Harry Strickland, it just sounds that in the world of Ice and Fire, when we have characters that go by the name of, Arya, Missandei, Aegon Targaryen. We got a guy named Harry Strickland. So I don't know quite where, because this guy's in the books. I don't know where George Martin pulled this fucking. It sounds like he would have been his accountant, and he just kind of, as a favor, threw the dude his name in as a character or something. But anyway, we have Cersei speaking with Mr. Strickland of the Golden Company. She is very disappointed with the lack of elephants.
I was told the Golden Company had elephants.
Because as most book readers, or all book readers should be aware, the Golden Company is known for having an army of elephants at their disposal. And I think they even kind of mentioned it last season when they briefly touched on the Golden Company, but I could be wrong about that. Anyway, we have Euron making his case to get Cersei in the sack. Doesn't go over so well for him at first, but his persistence seems to pay off. Cersei begrudgingly allows him to slip in there with her, and you gotta believe that there's an ulterior motive behind this. It's certainly. You can see the gears in her head turning a little bit before she decides to make that decision to allow him in. But anyway, we go from there to a scene with Bran, who is in the middle of a four-way, trying to have a good time, but these chicks won't shut up about the dragons and their victims. We get a little bit of an Easter egg as they mention the ginger, Eddie, the ginger, who had his eyelids burned off, and some. Now, I didn't catch this, but I've heard other people talking about it that made the connection between Eddie the Ginger and Ed Sheeran. Sheeran, I still don't know how to pronounce that dude's name. I really don't know who the fuck he is. But I think it was back in season 6 where we had that little moment where Arya rolled up on those guys, the Lannister soldiers, having a little camp out in the woods, sing-song moment, whatever. And so, yeah, I guess this guy got his eyelids burned off. Bron's tired of hearing about it, tells him to all shut the fuck up before Qyburn so rudely interrupts because he's got something very important that he wants to tell Bron. He's got a wagon full of golden chests because Cersei has a mission. But I'm getting ahead of myself because this was one of the other bits of humor that I did kind of like within the episode where Qyburn remarks on the one girl looking to have the pox and claiming that they'll be taking her within the year, and Bron kind of spits up his drink, which girl? And I think for his sake, I think he's all right because I watched that scene again and it looked like he was banging the redhead and it was the blonde that Qyburn remarked on having the pox. So I think Bron's in the clear here. But anyway, and this is kind of an awkward proposal. I mentioned in the instant take that I'm not really sure. It just seems something seems off here. We don't have Cersei proposing this herself. Now, part of that could be the fact that Jerome Flynn and Lena Headey evidently both have it in their contract that they will not do a scene together because I guess they were in a relationship and with each other in real life back in the day that went sour or whatever. But so I don't know if it maybe has something to do with that, but something else just feels off. I gotta wonder if this proposal is coming from somewhere else, potentially Euron. Euron would certainly have the motivation to get Jamie out of the picture. So who knows? I definitely don't see Bron taking, and I think as I'm yakking here, I haven't even mentioned what the proposal was, but yeah, so Cersei evidently wants Bron to go out, and should Tyrion and Jamie survive the war at Winterfell, the battle at Winterfell, she wants Bron to assassinate them both. I really personally, like I mentioned in my last video, I don't see Bron going through with this, but who knows? It's kind of it'll be interesting to see. I mean, the guy's been kind of, had a carrot dangled in front of him for fucking seasons now, whether or not he was going to get this castle. And, how badly does he really want this? Now, we've seen Bron kind of turn his back on Tyrion before when it came to, when he had the opportunity to stand up for him and fight in the trial by combat, of course. As much as Bron cares about Tyrion, he admittedly cares about himself more, and the mountain is a tall order. So, again, we'll see what happens there. It'll be interesting moving forward. From there, we cut to Cersei still bitching about the elephants, which I thought was actually another one of the finer bits of humor in the show, as Euron continues to basically borderline antagonize her, or just kind of poke at her, push her buttons as he asks how he compares to the Fat King or the King Slayer. Like I said, kind of testing the waters with her, seeing how far he can push her. He's playing this game while simultaneously stroking his own ego. Before he exits the room, he claims that he's going to put a prince in her belly. After his exit, we see Cersei's demeanor change pretty drastically. She looks quite upset as she holds her glass of wine and looks to shed a tear or two. So she's clearly upset about something, and I think you could kind of interpret this a couple different ways depending on whether or not you believe she's actually pregnant at all in the first place. Assuming that she is pregnant, and assuming that the child is, of course, Jaime's, which it definitely would be if she is pregnant, it could just be the fact that she's missing Jaime. She's here. She is dealing with this fucking asshole, and she, regardless of what she claims out loud, there is still something. She still has feelings for Jaime, her brother, in her heart. So it could be that. It could be the fact that perhaps she's miscarried the child. Maybe she was pregnant and it was a miscarriage. Or she's just reminded of the fact that this is, her whole shtick about the pregnancy was all a ruse. And once again, going back to, her allowing Jaime, or not allowing him to flee, but basically running him out. Maybe she's a little bit conflicted. Cersei is a bit of a complex character. As evil and nasty as she is, we've seen before, and, particularly when it comes to her children, she does, there is a bit of humanity within her. But anyway, from there we get a shot of Mac from Always Sunny taking an arrow through the eye, as Theon rescues Yara, basically executing, as I mentioned in my last video, executing the same game plan that Yara had attempted when she tried to rescue Reek from the clutches of Ramsay. Only he was actually successful. And I have to say that as little as I care about the Greyjoys, it is good to see, I want to say Theon back, but he's not back. This is a very drastic character arc, because when we go back to Theon in the beginning of the series, this kind of, brash and arrogant, kind of a dickhead, type character. And then of course, going through the transition from Theon Greyjoy to Reek, and then back to regaining some semblance of what he used to be. But, he's changed much more. He's much more than Theon Greyjoy now. He's actually kind of a heroic character, it seems, at this point. He regained his balls in the metaphorical sense, if not the physical. So, I'm not going to harp on that scene too much. It was good to see. It looks as though Yara, so for me, it's a kind of a positive thing, because I don't care about the Greyjoys all that much. The fewer of them around, the better. Looks to be probably the last scene we're going to get with Yara this season, this series. She's going to sail back to the Iron Islands. Theon is going to make his way over to Winterfell to join the cause. And speaking of Winterfell, we head back there to see Davos proposing a marriage alliance to Tyrion between Jon and Dany. This was kind of weird for me, because it seems like it would be evident to not just Tyrion, who was there on the boat as they were banging away. It should be obvious to pretty much anybody who sees them out in public together that they're kind of already well on their way to that on their own without anybody getting involved. So whatever, this was kind of a throwaway scene for me. It didn't mean a whole lot. When Varys, talks about, respect is how the young keep us at a distance, hinting that nothing lasts. I think that's hinting at the fact that, or the idea that Jon and Dany's love will be short-lived, but we shall see. So we go over to Dany and Jon discussing Sansa's lack of respect, before one of Dany's men informs her that the dragons are barely eating. Then we head on over. We got Jon and Dany, and we get our dragon riding scene. This is kind of a hot and cold thing, it seems, amongst people. When I talk to people about this scene, or when I get other people's opinions, some people really liked this scene. Some people really didn't. They thought it was silly, a waste of time. I don't know. I'm kind of more with. I don't want to say I'm with the latter. I'm kind of just indifferent to it. It was nice. It was cool visuals. I had to suspend my disbelief in that Jon wouldn't be fucking just completely losing his grip, and when they were doing some of those barrel rolls. And I guess I never really gave it a whole lot of thought before as to how difficult it has to be to fucking ride one of these goddamn things. If all you have is your hands to latch onto those horns that just, or those spikes on their back. Seems like that wouldn't be enough unless you have like the strongest grip on earth. But anyway, suspension of disbelief is an important thing. I think that this scene, to me, is just them getting it out of the way, getting Jon on a dragon now so that he'll know how to fly in an aerial battle against the Night King. Because I think it would be kind of weird if all of a sudden he just knows how to, when it counts, he knows how to fly a dragon. So I think this was just kind of getting that out of the way. Then they land over at the, a waterfall, and we have like another callback moment to Jon and Ygritte. When they talk about staying in a cave for forever, 1,000 years, whatever it was. So we get a similar moment with Jon and Dany, or at least it looks like it's leading up to that. And then we have just much like Lyanna Stark was staring a hole straight through Dany, we get Drogon looking on and staring a hole through Jon. And my initial interpretation of that was that it's almost kind of like the reincarnation of Khal Drogo, or it's like this, like Drogon literally has Drogo's spirit within him, and he's looking on. And of course, that's just my interpretation, and I've heard of a couple other people echo that. But most likely, it's just the dragons are they're her children. They're looking out for her, and they want to protect her. So it's like you better be good to her, Jon Snow. So who knows? Next scene we get is Gendry smithing weapons. He's in the process of creating an axe for the Hound. Hound treats him like shit over it, in typical Hound fashion, being a dick, until Arya comes to the rescue and tells the Hound to leave him alone. And so we get Arya's little reunion with the Hound. Nothing too long there. It's pretty appropriate. They both react as you would expect them to. It's about as warm a reunion as you could expect between those two, to be honest. And then, of course, we get the reunion with Arya and Gendry, which is, obviously Arya is a lot more chipper when it comes to Gendry. She's definitely got some feelings. There's a little flirty moments going on there, and she shows him a little drawing, a little diagram of a weapon she wants him to create. I've heard some debate, discussion, whatever you want to call it, surrounding this weapon. What is it? What is she trying to get him to make for it? It looks like some kind of spear, some kind of dragon glass spear. Is it like some kind of telescoping weapon? To me, it almost looked like it could be a spear that doubles as like a projectile. I'm not sure. I've looked at it a couple times. It looks like it's literally a drawing of a stick with a dragon glass dagger. Separate from it, it looks like there's some kind of arrows pointing in and out. So it looks to me like it could be some kind of projectile, but I guess we'll find out. After that, we get Sansa and Jon discussing House Glover abandoning them. Jon is defending his decisions. Sansa questions if the decisions were out of love for the North or love of Dany. Again, I understand, the Starks' skepticism. Again, we're talking about the North. All of these people, including the Starks, are very wary of outsiders, and so I guess it makes sense. It's within character for Sansa to react in the way that she does. Although she does exclaim to Jon that she does have faith in him, but she does question his motives. She questions whether or not, he did this out of love for the North or love for this Dragon Queen. So she's not 100% sold on her, but she's let it go for the moment. Next, we have Dany and Jorah going to meet up with Sam so that Dany can offer him her thanks and her gratitude. Asks if there's anything that she could do to return the favor, anything at all. He asks for a pardon for stealing a few books from the Citadel, as well as his family's sword, the heirloom. Upon explaining the nature of it, Dany puts two and two together and realizes that it was his father, Randall Tarley, that she had burned alive for his insolence, his refusing to bend the knee. As she explains it to him, we see Sam visibly shaken. But hey, his dad was an asshole, and at least I'll be able to go back home freely now that my brother is Lord. And of course, at that moment, that things go from bad to fucking way worse. When Dany exclaims that, yeah, sorry, but your brother was kind of there too, standing right next to him. Yeah, I had to kill them both. And I gotta say, this is one of the highlights of the episode for me. I think that John Bradley's acting was just fucking amazing. He gets. I talked about the awards. I don't know if I'm going to do the loser of the week, but I'm just going to say that he gets the tits and wine. John Bradley, the actor, because he really just sold. So I mean, he had me choked up. I really felt terrible for him, and you could see the look on Jorah's face was just like that, oh, fuck look, or he was just like that awkward bystander. And Dany, I kind of defended her a couple times earlier in the episode, but man, you could have done a better job in comforting this guy through this discussion. You could have done a better job for yourself, making yourself not look so fucking cold. But she really didn't. She was just very matter of fact about it. Of course, Sam doesn't, want to sit there and sob in front of her all day, so he decides to make his exit. And it's after that he runs into Bran. When asked, what the fuck are you doing out here sitting all alone in the dark, Bran exclaims that he's waiting for an old friend, which at the time, of course, on the first watch, you kind of don't really know who he's talking about. You assume maybe he's talking about Sam. At least that was the interpretation that I had. And then so it's at that point that Bran gives Sam the mission of, it's time for you to go inform Jon of his parentage. We don't have time for pleasantries early on when Jon and Dany first arrive. Yes, cut that short, but now we're going to send you on this mission to fucking throw a monkey wrench into everything. Right? But I'll tell you, as weird as it seems, it just seems odd to me that you would want to bestow this information upon Jon just before the Night King's going to arrive, right? You're gonna really muck things up. At least that's the way it seems logically. There's got to be a reason, Bran being able to see as much as he can. You got to assume that there's a reason for him to know this now. We'll see how it unfolds, but coming up next is what I think was the finest scene in the episode. When Sam informs Jon of his true parentage, I thought this was the best acting that I can recall seeing on the part of Kit Harington. As I mentioned in my initial reaction video, it's not that Kit Harington's a bad actor. He's especially always done fine with action scenes, but his character doesn't lend itself to, a broad range of emotions all the time. And here, it's just with such little dialogue, the weight of all of it. Kit Harington just really sold it, and as did John Bradley, and I really liked their conversation. It was good that it was Sam relaying this information to him rather than Bran. And that segue from Dany informing Sam of what she had done to his family put just the right amount of fucking anger within him. And even in an interview that I heard later from the actor himself, John Bradley, where he claimed that Sam's character views Dany at this point as a dangerous psychopath. He's not happy with Daenerys, so he definitely puts some stank on, reminding Jon that, hey, remember when you saved all the wildlings? You didn't execute everyone, and you relinquished your crown for the betterment of your people. Would she do the same? And so that's planting some interesting seeds within Jon's head. That's the thing that I'm looking forward to most now in the next episode, is to see how does Jon handle this, and how I think that as far as the crown goes, honestly, It's more about how Dany's going to react to this than Jon. Jon, again, he doesn't want a crown. He doesn't want this kind of. He doesn't want the pressure. He doesn't want the title. He doesn't. That's not in his character. So I don't see this big battle between Jon Snow or Aegon Targaryen versus Daenerys Targaryen for the crown. But it is going to matter, as we've been reminded throughout other moments of the episode, the people's perception. To get the North on your side, to unite all these people, this is going to fucking matter. And I think that's probably where, when we had that conversation with Davos and Varys and Tyrion talking about that marriage alliance, that's where it's gonna become so important. Why not have a king and a queen? And so that seems like it could be hashed outside the whole incest thing. It should be pretty clean, right? Of course, we know things don't work out quite that well in the world of Ice and Fire, but we'll see. From there, we make our way over to the Last Hearth, where we have Beric and Tormund creeping around, looking at what appears to be a massacre. Of course, there are no bodies present, save for one little Ned Umber, who we'll get to in just a minute, because, the White Walkers have already steamrolled that place, and they took the people with them as their newest addition to the army of whites. And what comes next is along with the dick jokes or the eunuch jokes from Tyrion earlier in the episode, this is the dumbest attempt at humor I thought in the entire episode. When Ed and Tormund run into each other, and Ed, everybody back up, he's got blue eyes. I've always had blue eyes. It was just fucking. It was a fucking cartoon. Like I mentioned in my last video, I thought it was dumb. It was just too heavy-handed. It's like, why? All right, if you don't know the difference between like a regular dude with blue eyes versus like the glowing fucking like translucent fucking blue eyes that the whites all have, I mean, come on. And then he's surrounded by clearly alive Beric and some other men. Like that scene was just stupid. But anyway, they turn up on the body of Ned Umber, staked right in the middle of a spiral of human body parts. Always the artist, as Mance Rayder once put it. The White Walkers have been there, like we just talked about. And I gotta say, at this moment, I was, as shitty as that attempt at humor I thought was, throughout the rest of the scene, it really worked for me. It was fucking genuinely creepy, and I was actually afraid for Tormund for a brief moment there, because you could see he had his back turned, and the way that was shot, it's just one of those it was a somewhat predictable shot. You knew that kid was going to raise his hand or move at some point, and he had a blade in his hand. So, and Tormund looked to be within striking distance. So I actually did fear for Tormund's life in that moment, just before, of course, the kid shrieked, and then Beric stepped in, put the torch to him, and put an end to that one. Now Beric and crew are a race against time to get their horses back to fucking Winterfell before the Night King gets there. From there, we have our final shot, or our final scene, I should say, with Jamie riding into Winterfell. It looks like his locks got a lot darker. It seems like that journey must have been long. He's grown a little bit of a beard. Hair seems to have gotten darker. Of course, we then see the long stare at Bran, which was a really great cliffhanger. Obviously, this is the old friend that Bran was talking about earlier. And Jamie's the look on Jamie's face, just it's priceless. It's just like, holy fuck. Talk about reunions. That was my favorite reunion of the episode. And of course, I don't think, Bran being not so Bran anymore, Bran being Three-Eyed Raven, it isn't going to harbor any ill will toward Jamie moving forward. But anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. I'm not going to get into like the predictions or preview for next week's episode. I'm just going to do these kind of as they come. This thing's already gone long enough. I'm not trying to do an hour's worth of material here. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Be sure to follow us once again at themoviesleuth.com. You can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Twitter. Of course, give this video a like and a subscribe if you're so inclined. And I will look forward to seeing you next Sunday night after the premiere of episode 2 with my instant reaction. Till then, have a good one.